Yep, it has been recorded. Thanks.
Thank you. So welcome to the third edition of the Building Strong Data Ecosystems for SDGs series, which is part of the Global Network webinars. My name is Alexander Loschke. I work in the Statistical Capacity Management section of UNSD, and together with Yushi Zhang from the Sustainable Development Goals Monitoring section, we will be moderating the webinar today. Our speakers, Elena Proden from UNITAR and Gabriel Games from UNSD, will present on StaTact, a tool for quick and cost-effective solutions to address pressing data needs. I would like to start, share my screen. 1 second. And before I to introduce today's topic, I would like to online social community, which is hosted on the Yammer platform. The global network was launched during the World Statistics Day this year and has grown already to a membership of about 850 users from national statistical offices and national geospatial entities, from UN system entities, including the regional commissions and the resident coordinator offices, and from other regional and international organizations outside of the UN system. The aim of the global network is to help national governments build resilient and sustainable national data and information systems for the full implementation of the SDGs through collaboration, knowledge sharing, network, and technical support. What can you do in the network? Well, you can get informed about events and activities held globally. You can build capacity by attending live webinars like this one today. You can advertise job and consultancy opportunities or read those. Find support and offer your own expertise on special topics, exchange best practices, notably on SDG monitoring or any other topic. You can connect with a global community of statisticians, geospatial data experts, and data officers. So in short, the global network supports coordination, collaboration, connection, and capacity building. This is just a quick peek at how the global network looks like. So if you haven't done so yet, please join the global network today by going to yammer.com/UNStats and register preferably with your work email address. If that doesn't work for any reason, or you really prefer to use your private email address, you can also do that. And so please join us on the global network today. So let me now come back to our today's webinar, StaTact, a tool for quick and cost-effective solutions to address pressing data needs. NSOs have been experiencing disruptions in some of the important statistical activities due to the COVID-19 situation. As a consequence, the importance of short-term approaches and quick problem solving has grown in relevance. StaTact, which was developed by UNITAR in close collaboration with the UN Statistics Division, offers a approach to statistical planning. The collaborative environment for national statistical systems and other users to develop action plans based on root case analysis and their implementation and progress. But the relevance of StaTact goes beyond the pandemic context. It's really about supporting operational annual level programming and implementation. quickly our speakers. Mrs. Elena Proden is a senior specialist in UNITAR's unit for the strategic implementation of the 2030 agenda. Elena is currently leading research, analysis, and advisory services for UN member states in 2 areas: strategic planning and data and statistics for the SDGs. Elena acts as team leader overseeing the design and delivery of a number of learning, training, and research projects and tools to support the implementation of the SDGs. She has also provided methodological support for the piloting of these tools at regional and country level in many world regions. Mr. Gabriel Games has been the interregional advisor on the organization and management of National Statistical Systems at the United Nations Statistics Division in New York since 2015. He is responsible for the implementation and monitoring of various global initiatives and programs aimed at modernizing the institutional frameworks and governance of national statistical systems in support of the 2030 Agenda and other international and national development policies. I want to say just a couple of things. We will first hear both speakers and will then have a Q&A session at the end. Feel free to write your questions into the meeting chat at any time. During the Q&A session, we will then either ask the question for you or you can use also you can also unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. This Global Network webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Global Network of Data Officers and Statisticians. So you still see here the URL. It's yammer.com at yammer.com/UNStats. So we would like to invite you to continue the discussion with our speakers on the Global Network after the webinar. And again, please keep your microphones muted. I hand over to you now. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I will start also by sharing my screen.
Yes. Yushi, can you make her presenter now?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, great.
So first, I would like to say that it's a great pleasure to be presenting today the StaTact 2 and also thank UN Statistics Division and the Global Network for this opportunity. Perhaps Alexander already mentioned a few things about this tool, and perhaps one thing that I would like to start with would be about what is it exactly. So what you will see today is in fact an online application, but StaTact itself is more than that. There is actually a whole sort of philosophy that lies behind this tool that is really about emphasizing short-term tactical approaches to addressing data problems by basically really aiming at very specific and realistic actions. So the word StaTact comes from there. As you can see, it consists of statistics and tactics. And as Alexander already mentioned, it was developed by UNITAR in close collaboration with UN Statistics Division, and also more specifically with Gabriel, who is also part of this panel today and who will be also talking about the tool. So the tool was designed to provide planners, data producers, and decision makers with a tactical approach to solving specific data measurement problems considered a national priority, and more specifically in the context of monitoring SDGs, but also nationally relevant indicators. So why is that tactics and basically data problems? Why do we need a tool like that? Sort of the idea comes a little bit from the realization that, of course, the 2030 agenda, the scope of the 2030 agenda and the SDGs is very broad, and a lot of work has been done by the interagency expert group on SDG indicators to define the global set of indicators. However, countries also with lower levels of capacities are facing immense challenges when it comes to meeting all the data demands related to the to monitoring progress on SDGs, also in a nationally relevant manner. And the tool was developed to help them really make fast progress on those areas that they really consider nationally a priority for making progress on SDGs in a country. Typically, when we say short term, we think about the horizon of 9 to 12 months. And when we say realistic, we also quite often mean something that is specific enough and also does not necessarily require a lot of resources. So basically, we used a lot this analogy, which is a nice analogy, to say what is the difference between strategy and tactics. So that your strategy may be to take the river, but how exactly do you take the river? That would be your tactics. You may want to choose a boat, but also a boat that will enable you to fare well in different circumstances over a period, over a given span of the river to counter possible floods, droughts, or any unforeseen obstacles on your way. Also, sort of when we look at the national strategic planning landscape in general, I guess it helps us a little bit to place StaTact in this context as well. At the national level, of course, we would have mid-term to long-term policy instruments such as national development plans, sectoral strategies. Also, we would have short-term instruments such as annual operational work plans, also linked very closely to the budgeting processes. And in the area of statistics, of course, many countries have national plans or strategies for the development of statistics, which are longer-term instruments providing this vision, sort of the rivers, quite often going over a period of 10 years. But also what is needed to sort of operationalize and bring these strategies into life, you need to have short-term planning processes and also define certain activities in more details to make them actionable and really put the timelines and assign responsibilities. Also, StaTact then might be a very helpful tool in supporting this annual work programming or operational planning, basically, to help you really when it comes to the area of statistics and data, to really specify the actions that are needed to make progress and implement these operational plans. So 3 keywords characterize StaTact. We already mentioned it's action-oriented. So we've heard quite a lot, and I will show you a few pictures. We already did use StaTact in a number of countries, first in an Excel-based format, and then the first web application that had been upgraded afterwards. And what quite often we've heard from the users of StaTact was that sometimes they feel overwhelmed by the scope of what they need to do on monitoring the SDGs. But this approach, which we will show, help them to dig deeper down to the root causes of the problems and understand that actually they can solve some of them. And there are some specific actions that can be taken to address those. Then tactical, I have already talked about that. And finally, very important feature of StaTact, it's a collaborative tool. So basically, to develop your action plan, you need to do it in collaboration with key stakeholders, with data holders, data users, data producers, of course. And then you need to make sure that they are part of this collaborative process of designing, analyzing the problem, designing the action plan, and also some of them will be responsible for implementation. So the new upgraded version of StaTact does provide this feature online, that it's really a collaborative space that you can exchange using various chat functions and other editing possibilities, and then do your work group online together, basically. I will show it in more detail during the demo after Gabriel's presentation. But basically, there are 4 essential steps in StaTact. We start with a problem statement and business case, making it more specific. So it's really a bottom-up process. Then we do the problem analysis using the Gamzo and JSBPM models, and Gabriel will talk more about that part. Then you develop your action plan based on the problem analysis jointly as a group. And then finally, there is the implementation stage, and you can use the tool to monitor implementation. So here is just a few pictures from these workshops that I mentioned. Now, in terms of what kind of data problems or measurement problems can the tool help address you? Actually, very different ones. The most important thing, they should be something, or they should be reduced down very specific problem that can be dealt with over a relatively short-term horizon. And even if your initial challenge is longer term and bigger in scope, this solution should help you make progress on getting there towards solving this longer term problem later down the road. So you can see here some examples, really. The sort of issues ranged from domestic violence and child abuse data to agricultural statistics, educational outcomes data, environmental indicators, etc. But also there were some problem statements that were related more to governance aspects, such as, for example, the NSDS that was not implemented, or there is a problem with developing it, or coordination of National Statistical System, but again with very specific problems that StaTact helps to address. For example, coordination on, coordination on standards and classifications with various parts of National Statistical System, etc. Now, in what sort of context can StaTact be useful? We've seen several opportunities, but in fact, the range may be much larger. It can be that, for example, as I mentioned, the overall strategy has not been implemented, or there were big challenges in certain result areas where no progress has been made. So StaTact can be useful to sort of review those and help identify what were the specific bottlenecks in some of those to help you define the way forward. It can be also that, for example, you are in the middle of your strategy and you are facing an impasse or obstacle in a specific area, and then StaTact would be certainly useful in this respect. Sometimes an unforeseen new opportunity may come up related, for example, to new data sources, or a challenge exists in the data ecosystem and requires quick action, or something unexpected such as COVID-19 has happened, and right now you actually need to review your ways of working and find other solutions on how to make progress in a short term. And finally, it can help you also to have a consultative exchange on certain topics. And above all, as I mentioned, also it can be a very useful tool for your operational annual work planning. We designed this diagram together with the Paris 21 colleagues, just to show also how the two tools, for those of you who are familiar with ADAPT, complement each other. So you can see here sort of in gray the key building blocks or stages of ADAPT. And then also you can see how StaTact can be used in the context of these stages. when it comes, for example, to national data plan design to fine-tune some solutions, data plan implementation, for example, as I was just saying now, sometimes the solution or activities may not be specific enough, so you need to operationalize them to make it more concrete, assign responsibilities, timelines, etc. Or you may be facing an obstacle, so you may need to find an alternative or innovative way of addressing your problem. And then finally, also in the stage of data gaps, or rather, when you identify your data gaps, also it can help fast track selected data gaps. And this would be my last slide before also I hand over to Gabriel. This is just to explain how StaTact is managed. What I will show in the demo, it will be a country page. Typically, the StaTact was developed in the first place for national statistical offices to engage not only with NSO staff, but also with stakeholders outside of NSO, members of the National Statistical Systems, but also data users, other data holders, and also international and regional experts. So typically, the country websites, they would have a national administrator who would manage the national subsites, create StaTact projects or working groups, and assign working group leaders or project managers in our terminology, then manage key country documents and add national indicators. You will see that we have global SDG indicators by default. Then the next level in the hierarchy is project manager. So once the projects are set up, each project is managed by the project manager, who can modify main content, invite other members to join. So members from his or her team, other key stakeholders, and also international and regional experts whose contribution would be really important or relevant, who can help in advising on how to solve a certain data problem. And then he or she can give editing rights. And finally, the last level is project members and users. They can, so they would participate in the working group to which they were invited. They can be participating in more than one project or working group. They can comment in a chat box. So there is this functionality really to allow exchange online. And they can also do some editing if they are granted editing rights. And the final feature, as I mentioned, there is a possibility to monitor implementation. So those who are involved in the implementation and are assigned certain responsibilities, they can also monitor implementation and mark the completion of the tasks. And I will stop here so that also we could look a little bit in a more detail. This is what Gabriel will be doing on some of the conceptual models that are being used before we show the demo.
Thank you very much, Elena. I don't know how much time we will have for the demo, right? Because we have half an hour left or something like that. It's also true that we started 15 minutes too late, basically, with our presentation. But if we want to have 15, 20 minutes discussion, of course, we don't have much time for a demo. I'm going to share my slide, but for the moment, I still can't do that. So I don't know if someone can give me the right to do that. Thank you very much. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
It looks good. Okay, excellent. So everybody, I'm very happy to be here with you. It's very exciting to present this tool. I mean, the StaTact tool that was developed by UNITAR with our cooperation or collaboration, the UNSD one. I will try to be rather short, but the presentation I'm doing, actually, it's a presentation that I noticed that was needed when we were in countries, but also in regions, to present StaTact, because it was quite a lot of misunderstanding, not from the statisticians, but many other stakeholders. And remember, StaTact is a collaborative tool. So it means we bring different stakeholders around the table. Now the table is virtual, of course, StaTact is in the cloud, but I mean, the idea is us to bring these different stakeholders around the table. And for some stakeholders, the idea of the production of statistics and indicators was not very clear. And then they had the impression that producing statistics was just to collect data. And that's why, if I go now, here, the next one, okay. My presentation will be actually from data to statistics, principles, and StaTact underlying models. To start very quickly, I mean, and this is what people believe that nowadays 90%, and it's true actually, 90%, if not more, of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years or very recently. This is true. Of course, it's not always easy to access these data for different reasons. That's not the purpose now of my presentation. But something that is very important to understand is that data is raw information. This raw information does not speak to most of the users. I mean, it's nice to have big data. It's nice even to have the result of a survey, but it doesn't speak immediately to the user. This has to be actually converted or transformed into something that makes sense to the users. And statistics is exactly the science or the process or the activity that convert raw data, raw information into something that can be used for decision making or something that is can be converted into knowledge. The next slide, I take this example that I've been using now since a while about the electricity. You have, of course, on the left side, the providers of electricity. You have the traditional one. You have some that are less traditional, and we can make, of course, by analogy, we can think also about the data. Some are the data sources, the traditional one, like censuses and surveys, and some others are the more innovative one, like, for example, citizen-generated data, big data, geospatial information. On the other side, you have the users. You have the business, you have the research community, you have the administration and the government, and you have the civil society. The problem that we have there, and I come back to this transformation, is that on one side, we have high voltage electricity when the users need to have public electricity to charge their mobile phones, I mean, or to watch TV, for example. So what we need there in between is a device or an institution that would transform high voltage electricity in something that makes sense for the users. And this is exactly the role of statistics, transforming raw data, data that does not make always sense for the users, into something that users can use for decision making. Now, statistics is one thing. I don't want to spend too much time on that one, but official statistics has on top of that some additional values that have been converted in some important principles and code of practices, right? I mean, official statistics is universal, relevant, independent, professional, resilient, and agile. And this is something that will come back with StaTact. Confidential in the way that we keep confidential the information we receive from the respondent, and accountable and transparent. I don't want to go further into this. You know that we have the UN fundamental principles of official statistics that have been converted or extended in different regions in statistics code of good practices, and eventually translated into national statistical legislation. Now, when we have an issue with data, with StaTact, we try to bring the different stakeholders together. The problem is that the different stakeholders may have a different representation of what the production process from data to statistics is. It's a little bit like everybody would come with his or her own electricity scheme, and we try to discuss where the issue could be and how to solve it, and we don't have at all the same taxonomy and representation of the reality. So in order to avoid this, very early when we developed StaTact, we had to think about models. And the two models that are used actually for StaTact are based on two generic models that were developed by the high-level group for modernization of official statistics under the auspices of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. One is the GSPPM, the generic statistical business model, and the other one is GAMSO, the generic activity model of statistical organizations. These two models are widely used to map, analyze, and improve statistical production processes and related governance activities in many countries now. So it was developed by UNECE, but is now used in most of the country. Actually, GSPPM is a sub-model of GAMSO, but for the purpose of my presentation, I will present them separately. What is important is also that GSPPM can be applied to all activities undertaken by producers of official statistics, both nationally and internationally. GSPPM, the model, you can see that, is designed to be independent of the data source. It could be a survey, a census, administrative records, or another innovative data source like big data or geospatial information. This was very important when we started to work with StaTact and develop StaTact, because by definition, StaTact is a short-term tool. So in most of the cases, we will not be able with StaTact to say we want to design a new survey. We will have to find what is already existing. So it could be improving a survey that is already conducted on a regular basis, or look around for other data sources that could complement what we are already collecting. And this was important. The model shows the different steps or phases of the production process for official statistics. From the first one, specify the needs, to evaluate through the phase of design, build, collection, process, analysis, and dissemination. This is something important because most of the stakeholders think that statistics is only the collection, when actually statistics, it's the overall process, which starts by specifying the needs, since official statistics produce statistics for the others mainly. Now here more in detail, of course, GSPPM, you saw it here at the higher level. Now here we are at the lower level. You have that, you see that each phase of the process can be further described in sub-processes. I'm not going now to discuss further that, but you see that, for example, specify the needs, design, build, or collect are more than one sub-process each. Then after that, of course, here we have the GAMSO, the generic activity model for statistical organization. GAMSO is actually the corporate support, cross-cutting activities that are required by a statistical agency to address its program of work and support its production processes, or GSPPM. Typical activities under corporate support, or here we don't have only corporate support, you have seen that before, that we have strategy and leadership, capability development, and corporate support. I wanted to stop only on corporate support because it's very obvious that corporate support is something that supports the production process of statistics. You can see here, manage quality, manage consumers, manage finances, manage human resources. Of course, when GSPPM was developed, we noticed very quickly that some activities were missing, that the statistical production alone is not going to function if we are not supporting some of these activities. So this was developed after all. So these two models, GSPPM and GAMSO, are really important for StaTact. Now, if you look a little bit, this was explained by Elena before. I don't want now to discuss ADAPT. I don't think really my role here for the moment. But in general, when we go for a strategic analysis of a national statistical system, we would start by strategy and leadership, going down to capability development, digging further to corporate support, and then to look at the production processes and eventually at the final products. StaTact is actually a bottom-up process. So we're going to start by the products, the data gaps, thinking about the processes for its production. And if we find that there is something that could be related to the governance, then we would go further to corporate support, capability, and eventually to strategy and leadership. So the visions are different, but at the end, we should bridge these two way of thinking. And this was what Elena presented before about ADAPT and StaTact. So now just to conclude, GAMSO and GSPPM, and here you have the links to the wiki page of UNECE, two coherent and interrelated models. GAMSO and GSPPM offer harmonized taxonomies, concepts, and representation of data governance and production. Very important, so that all stakeholders are speaking the same language. GAMSO and GSPPM are the two columns that support and structure the StaTact tool, and GAMSO and GSPPM allow you, through StaTact, to identify, analyze, and eventually solve issues with data, statistics, and indicators. Thank you very much for your attention. I had to rush a little bit because I'm afraid that we'll be a little bit late. But if you have further questions, you have the chat, or you can always come also after this session to me. Thank you very much. Back to you, Elena.
Thank you, Gabriel. And I will try to do the demo short so that we go through, without going into much detail, just give a flavor of how the application looks like and keep a bit more time for questions also. I would need now to be able to share. I'm sharing my screen now. So I hope you can see the website.
Yes, I can see the website.
Yeah. So basically, here what you see, that would be a typical country landing page where you would see different projects. If you are a simple user or project manager, you would only see your projects in the projects in which you're involved in. And on the bottom, you would also see the projects, for example, which are already under implementation and where you may have specific responsibilities or roles to, that you have to play and deadlines to meet. Now we will go into one example. So I already mentioned that in the country settings, one can add national indicators, define certain tags and documents, but the most interesting part would be projects. So basically, suppose I will pick one of them on the demo land. So it's a made-up project, which is inspired also by what is done in reality on water quality data. So in the project, on the project page, what you would see the overview. This is where we are situated. And then you would see all the key stages of the process that have already been mentioned. So on the overview page, basically you can describe what you do, add key documents. And most importantly, as a project manager, you would be here, for example, if you're a project manager, and then you can invite your members. Basically, you can add by typing the email address and invite the person you want to join this group, and he or she will receive an invitation to register. And once they're registered, they will be activated and they will be members of this group, of this project. Now, going into the process itself, we start with a problem statement, as this has been explained already. In this case, for example, we are looking at a country that is struggling with providing data on water quality for SDG indicator 6.3.2. And they have some issues, for example, related to the coverage. And then the problem statement, it basically describes, it's there to help you specify your problem, make it really specific. And then the business case, you turn it positive. So what are the advantages of solving this problem with a policy link? Also, what kind of, how this data, once it's there, can help you also advance the policy agenda. And on this page, you also define your key stakeholders. So some of them you may have already invited, but when you discuss as a group, you may realize that there are others who may be missing. It can be data users, data producers, etc., other types of stakeholders. Then you go basically as a next stage to the problem analysis. In the problem analysis, there are sort of three building blocks. The first one is relevant indicators. You start your analysis by mapping your data problem to indicators. And here you can see there was an obvious indicator. Sometimes the data problem may relate to more than one indicator. And by default, you have basically you have SDG indicators that are added, but then you can also add country indicators. For the demo land, you see we had some specific indicators that had been added here. So once you edit your indicator, you also need to define the data source from which it's being produced or potentially can be produced. And once you've done this, here on the bottom, there will appear a framework composed of JSBPM and Gamzo that will let you analyze basically your data problem and indicator with a data source using these two models. By clicking here, for example, you will see right now we are under JSBPM. So you can see key stages. You can decide which ones are relevant for you. For example, I click on build the collection instrument. Here you define your root cause, main agency responsible in this area. You define the priority, whether it's high priority or maybe it's something long-term that you cannot address in short-term. And then you also discuss as a group what should be the solution, sort of overall solution. This is for JSBPM, and you can do the same for Gamzo, for the same indicator and data source. So again, here you can see, for example, the list of those that have already been done. There are 3 root causes with responsible agencies and solutions. And so one of them was prioritized. So the idea of StaTact is to focus. So you may not be able to solve everything at a time. You should be thinking what is, tactically speaking, is the priority and can help you make progress in the specific problem that you are facing. And what is important to show, under each stage, you have these options to do the chat function. Basically, you can write a comment. For those who don't have editing rights, they can comment. And then also you have the history of the activities. Who has changed what? When you share editing rights, that can be useful. So you can go back to the previous version. And then finally, there is the action plan. So in the action plan, you have your overall indicator of achievement. You reconfirm your working group. Now, the working group that would be responsible for designing and implementing the action plan. You think of possible champions that you may need to involve. And then now you make it really more specific. In the list overview, for example, you can see here some key sort of metadata on the top. So that's the overall duration of your project and the total budget. And how did they appear here? Basically, you do your most specific planning, and then those entries are aggregated up to these totals. So the solutions you defined in the previous stage will appear here with the cause of the problem. You can see them here. But the solutions may not be enough. And this stage is really about defining what kind of action you need to take to implement this solution. And also what kind of tasks need to be implemented by different responsible persons. So tasks are at the level of a person, within which timeline. And then this timeline would aggregate up for your solution. And then you also, at the level of action, you can define needed resources and budget. So it's done, everything is done here. Sorry, that's here you can see, you can also add the budget. So basically, that's the idea of the action plan. You can see it in different layouts here with the timeline. And finally, once you finalize the plan, you can close it and you'll be in the implementation stage. Sometimes you may need to make some corrections, of course. So in the implementation stage, you can schedule your implementation or review meetings. And you can also track progress. As I mentioned, for example, here you can mark what kind of tasks have been implemented, and you can also mark the significance or impact to actually achieving the solution, to implementing the solution. So basically, that's the idea in a nutshell. You can also, there are functionalities that allow you, for example, here it's in progress, to cancel certain tasks, for example. And you will see it will appear in red. So that's in a nutshell. And the final theme, there is also a StaTact community. So the projects can only be consulted by those who were invited officially to be part of the projects. However, project managers may decide to share the PDFs. It's also possible to produce PDF reports with other countries where they consider their project a good practice and they want to share the summary. So these can be shared through the StaTact community of practice. And I will stop here so that you could take the questions.
Thanks so much, Elena and Gabriel, for the presentation. So I would like to open up now the floor for questions. And I saw already a couple of them in the meeting chat. So let me maybe start with a last question, which was also actually would have been my question. So which countries are already using StaTact, and how have the UN country teams been involved or invited to use StaTact? Maybe you can say something on that.
So very quickly, this new version of StaTact, we're just rolling it out. We presented it in 3 regional workshops. We had one country in Latin American region who did a case study. And we are running now a national workshop with the Philippines as a first pilot country with a new application. We are actually doing this week. And then regarding the previous versions, we used it particularly last year with the Pacific Islands a lot. We also did 2 national workshops in the Caribbean region with Grenada and Suriname. And we also used Excel-based version before with a number of least developed countries in the African and Asian regions.
Thanks so much. I see one question also by Dominic Abimana. Can StaTact be used by any of the international regional organizations supporting countries to design and develop their NSDSs? If yes, how far the users are able to adjust the content based on specific country needs? I mean, you talked about it in general, but I think here the interesting part would be also whether it can support also the design and implementation of the NSDS. So over to you.
Yeah, maybe I will start, and also Gabriel, I guess you would probably also want to complement or say something. So I think I already addressed this question in the chat, basically by saying that for NSDS, it's a national process. So typically international experts would need to be invited, but it's completely possible as other members of the working group. So they can participate, but it should be the country inviting them to do so. But then Gabriel, I think, mentioned that indeed the idea is also for regional level initiatives. It's possible also to set up a page, for example, I don't know if it's in the area of gender, it could be UN Women page, and then there could be regional initiatives projects that will not be national projects.
Yes, thank you, Elena. Yeah, I answered actually in written to that question, saying exactly as you say, that it can be used also at regional or global level even. I mentioned in my presentation that this model, in particular GSPPM, is a model that can be used also at regional or global level. One point that is important, I wouldn't use StaTact to develop a national strategy. But if I have a problem in the implementation of my national strategy, I could use StaTact to understand why I have this issue. And this was also one of our, I would say, original thinking or thoughts about StaTact, a tool that can help so many countries that in the long-term process of implementing a national strategy, find some small issues, and because of these issues actually are giving up, and we don't eventually implement the strategy because it was a little spike or a little stone on the road, and we didn't know how to actually manage that. So StaTact is very useful in the process of the implementation of a national strategy, not only, but that's something that is working rather well.
Thanks so much, Gabriel and Elena, for this. There's another question. Can you elaborate maybe a little bit about looking at the country experiences? So those countries who have already used StaTact, who have been the main counterparts owning and leading the use of this tool? So who have been the leads on using StaTact?
From the very beginning, organizationally, the National Statistical Office was the main lead. That's how the tool was designed. And initially, when we started with Excel-based version, we were organizing regional and national workshops with the letters going to chief statisticians. And for quite a few of them, we actually also had chief statisticians participating in these workshops. But then other members of the National Statistical System, but also data users, international organizations for national ones, were also invited to participate. But the coordinator, the lead is National Statistical Office, and national administrators are from NSO.
Thanks so much. So we still have a couple of minutes for questions. So please let us know, raise your hand or write it in the meeting chat, and so we can take another question or two.
Maybe Alexander, I guess there was a question on UNCTs that we have not addressed.
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I think this sort of this webinar is also a good opportunity, I guess, to say so. So while the NSOs are of course sort of the main coordinators, we also hope that, and they are the ones, the way it's designed, it's the NSO because of national ownership. The NSO should invite others to participate in the working groups. But of course, we hope that UN country teams will also encourage the NSO to use StaTact more actively to help in addressing some of those issues. And of course, typically they would be members of these working groups according to their expertise, depending on what they're involved in, data officers, etc.
Yeah, just very quickly on that. I mean, just so that we all understand that StaTact is a very, very young tool, right? I mean, we get these questions, how many countries are fully using it? I mean, the UN country teams, etc. It's young. That's the purpose of this presentation, to present this new tool that had 3 versions, an Excel one, a first web one, and a cloud one. But now we are deploying this tool. We are helping some countries to actually solve their issues thanks to this tool, and we are doing that with the Philippines at the moment. But the whole idea is actually to introduce this tool and use it. So the UN country teams are welcome to approach us and work with us so that we can use these tools, I mean, to solve their data gaps in the countries.
Yes, thanks, Gabriel. This is a very important point because today we have also a good number of colleagues from the resident coordinator offices and of course from the regional commissions and so on present. So yeah, this is to underline again. So if you are interested in using this tool, please contact Elena and Gabriel after this meeting, either directly via email or also on the global network. Do we have additional questions?
Perhaps if I may add something very quickly, also when it comes, I think Gabriel was saying that I guess the particular usefulness of StaTact is during the implementation of the NSDS. Then we were also, when we were showing on the diagram, sometimes you may be working on the NSDS, but there are specific areas or specific problems that you don't know how to go about it. And this is where it would be useful. So it's really about sort of being, making things specific and realistic, not necessarily about a very exhaustive and comprehensive process, which would be more strategy level, of course, strategic planning. So tactics can help you with your strategy and should help you with your strategy, but it does not replace the strategy.
Thanks. So if there are no other urgent questions, then I would say, Elena, Gabriel, thanks so much for presenting today. Maybe I can encourage everybody to unmute themselves and actually give Elena and Gabriel a real round of applause. Now in those virtual times, it's always nice to get also some real applause. So please join me.
Bravo.
Thank you very much.
Impressive, Alex.
Yeah, I know. We still have to practice this a little bit during the next global network webinar.
That's fine.
So yeah, usually if you want, you can stop the recording now. Thanks.